By law, the Pentagon is required to tell the public what it knows about UFOs. The Pentagon has spent decades studying these otherworldly remains in order to build more technologically advanced weapons systems. Okay, that's what the former intel officer revealed, and it was clear he was telling the truth. In other words, UFOs are actually real, and apparently so is extraterrestrial life. Now we know. At it, a U.S. Air Force captain called David Shindeli said he was part of an incident in which a UFO disabled 10 nuclear ICBM missiles. The first question is this real? Or am I just being a crazy person who's spending too much time on the internet? In other words, UFOs are actually real, and apparently so is extraterrestrial life. Now we know. So Elon Musk has spent a lot of his life thinking about space, and he's got the world's biggest rocket company. So we asked him, have you ever seen anything out there that suggests alien life? And by the way, how do you think life on this planet is going? Elon Musk has been one of the rare voices to raise the alarm about lower birth rates. He's doing something about it personally. He thinks the rest of us should too. Here's this part of the conversation.
People sometimes take the fact that we're here on Earth for granted, and that there's consciousness is just a normal thing that happens. But to the best of my knowledge, we see no evidence of conscious life anywhere in the universe. So it might be there. Physics they call it sort of the Fermi paradox. After when Enrico Fermi was an amazing physicist, asked the fundamental question: where are the aliens?
Yeah.
A lot of people ask me, where are the aliens? And I think if anyone would know about aliens on Earth, it would probably be me.
I would think.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with space stuff, and I've seen no evidence of aliens. So I would immediately tweet it out. This is split second. That would be like one of the all-time, probably the top tweet of all time. Found one, guys. It's a jackpot. Some 8 billion likes. Next level jackpot if you find the aliens. I don't think they're keeping this under, and it was like some general, I think in the 60s, who where they were saying show us the aliens, like Area 51, etc. And he said listen, we are constantly trying to get the defense budget to expand, and you know what would really get no arguments for anyone? If we pulled out an alien and said, we need money to protect ourselves from these guys. How much money do you want? You got it. They look dangerous. So the fastest way to get a defense budget increase would be for me to pull out an alien, We'd be like, yeah, there could be the invasion fleet could be arriving any minute, who knows? So, so I digress, but
you were saying that our consciousness makes us unique in the universe so far as we know, and that we take
yes,
it for
I'm not saying
granted.
that we are unique. I'm simply stating, to the best of my knowledge, that there is no evidence for other conscious life. I hope there is, and I hope they're peaceful. Obviously, the two important characteristics. But I'm just saying we haven't seen anything yet. So.
Yeah. But you think that we take our existence here for granted?
Yeah, I think
there are threats to it.
Yeah, exactly. So, I just think we should not assume that civilization is robust. And if you look at the history of civilizations, the rise and fall of the ancient Egyptians, the ancient Sumerians, Rome, there's throughout the world there've been a rise and fall of many civilizations. So there's an arc. There's sort of a life cycle arc to civilizations, just as there is to individual humans.
Yes.
And I think we just want to make sure that we have civilization go onward and upward. And that's, for example, why I'm concerned about decreasing birth rates and the fact that, for example, Japan had twice as many deaths last year as births. So that's they're a leading indicator.
Can I say, and you've written and talked a lot about this, but can I just ask you to pause just for a parenthetical note? Why is that? The urge to have sex and to procreate is, after breathing and eating, the most basic urge. Yeah. How has it been subverted?
Well, it's just in the past we could rely upon simple limbic system rewards
Yes.
in order to procreate. But once you have birth control and abortions and whatnot, now you can still satisfy the limbic instinct, but not procreate. So we haven't yet evolved to deal with that, because this is all fairly recent, the last 50 years or so, for birth control. So I'm sort of worried that, hey, civilization, if we don't make enough people to at least sustain our numbers, perhaps increase a little bit, then civilization is going to crumble. There's the old question of will civilization end with a bang or a whimper? Well, it's currently trying to end with a whimper in adult diapers.
Yes.
Which is depressing as hell.
The most depressing.
I mean, seriously, yeah.
War is less depressing.
Yeah, I'd rather go out with a bang.
Yeah, amen. With your shoes on.
Yeah.
Not with your
more
diaper.
exciting.
Yeah. A former Air Force officer who worked for years in military intelligence came forward as a whistleblower to reveal that the U.S. government has physical evidence of crashed non-human-made aircraft, as well as the bodies of the pilots who flew those aircraft.
These are retrieving non-human origin technical vehicles, call it spacecraft if you will, non-human, exotic origin vehicles that have either landed or crashed.
We have spacecraft from another species.
We do, yeah.
How many?
Quite a number.
You're kidding.
No. When you recover something that's either landed or crashed, sometimes you encounter dead pilots. And believe it or not, as fantastical as that sounds, it's true.
This is not a lie.
No, absolutely not. I am for real. And I'm sitting here at great personal risk and obvious professional risk by talking to you today.
In a normal country, this news would qualify as a bombshell, the story of the millennium. But in our country, it doesn't. The whistleblower's account ran on a technology website called the Debrief, which you've probably never heard of. The Washington Post had that story, but decided not to run it. The New York Times, meanwhile, just pretended it never happened. On the front page of the New York Times website this morning, there were 5 stories about Ukraine, as well as 4 stories apiece about Donald Trump, trans people, and climate change, the usual lineup. There was nothing at all about how an alien species is flying hypersonic aircraft over our cities. Not one word. So if you're wondering why our country seems so dysfunctional, this is a big part of the reason. Nobody knows what's happening. A small group of people control access to all relevant information, and the rest of us don't know. We're allowed to yap all we want about racism, but go ahead and talk about something that really matters and see what happens. If you keep it up, they'll make you be quiet. Trust us. That's how they maintain control. When Western tourists first started traveling in large numbers to the Soviet Union in the early 1970s, they found that many Russians had a completely warped understanding of the United States. They thought that Americans lived in grinding poverty, in a state of perpetual race war, and were desperate to flee to the freedom and prosperity of the Eastern Bloc. They thought this because that's what they had been told. They had no way to know otherwise. The few Russians who understood what was really going on in the rest of the world had learned about it from listening to shortwave radio broadcasts, sometimes under the covers so the neighbors wouldn't hear. 50 years later, it is bewildering to consider the ironies here. We're the ones who live in ignorance now. The US government has managed to classify more than 1 billion so-called public documents. So at this point, we can't possibly know what our leaders are doing. We're not allowed to know. By definition, that is not a democracy. Yet it's fine with the media. Secrecy is a powerful tool of control. So history has recorded the first big UFO sighting in the United States is 1947 in Roswell, New Mexico, very famously right outside Roswell. But actually, there was, in some sense, a bigger and more significant event sighting 2 years before, also in New Mexico, at exactly the moment the US government was detonating the first atomic weapon, shortly thereafter used in Japan. And witnesses on the ground saw some kind of object shaped like an avocado, they said, crash land. It was inspected by a lot of locals. There were beings inside, they said, and it was carted away by the US government. Now, people don't want to be called crazy, so no one said too much about it for quite some years, but people within the US government believe it's true, and they believe it so strongly that now, as of this week, the Defense Department's annual spending bill will require, as per Congress, the Pentagon to go back and investigate what really happened. clearly people within the U.S. government believe it's real, or they wouldn't have attached this to a spending bill, correct?
Correct, yes. This is being called the Roswell before Roswell. And you're right, people with some knowledge of these intelligence programs who've been briefing Congress about this made sure that this was put into the legislation. And it's one of many UFO provisions in the new defense bill. The DoD must provide Congress with a list of everything they've found out about this specific incident, but all other incidents and programs from January 1st, 1945 onwards, and anyone involved in these programs or with information about it will be released from their secrecy oaths and non-disclosure agreements, and they'll be able to testify to Congress about this.
So here we have the nuclear connection again. This was around the first detonation in human history of a nuclear device. Subsequent to that, you've had UFO sightings at nuclear missile bases, around nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, nuclear-powered submarines. There's clearly some I mean, I don't pretend to understand, but nuclear has some connection to these sightings, no? The U.S. government has verified they're real, in the sense there are objects moving in the sky that we cannot identify. They're certain they do not belong to a foreign nation. They're not from Russia or from China. And third, we know that these objects are moving in ways that we cannot replicate, explain, or even understand. So everyone who studied this in the U.S. government will admit that privately. No one has really said that out loud, and that may change very soon. So for the first time in half a century, there will be a public hearing on UFOs. The House Intelligence Subcommittee will hear from 2 senior Pentagon officials tomorrow on what the Defense Department actually knows about these objects. The Pentagon and intel agencies are reportedly feuding tonight on how much the public should know. What would possibly be the justification for holding back from the public what the U.S. government, which the public pays for, knows about these objects?
Well, in fact, it might not be so much what we know, Tucker, but the fact that we don't know some things. Clearly, right. from a national security perspective, the last thing you want to do is ever broadcast your, if you will, your intelligence gaps to your enemy. And in this particular case, you said it yourself. There's a lot more we don't know than we do know. But you're right. This is a historic move. Since 50 years ago, the last time we were faced with this, you had the Air Force briefing the results of Project Blue Book. Here we are, half a century later, and now we have senior DoD officials now, not just the Air Force, coming up and providing information to Congress and ultimately the American people.
Just a few weeks ago, the Navy admitted for the first time that several UFO videos were real, meaning they show actual area phenomenon that so far the Pentagon cannot explain. Now, a UFO investigations group says they have found materials that could potentially be physical evidence of UFOs. What is this material, and why could it shed light on the question of what UFOs might be?
Sure. Well, our company over the last year and a half has actually obtained quite a bit of material. And let me first preface by saying some of that material, its provenance is frankly hearsay, while the provenance of some of this material has been substantiated. And ultimately, we're in the process of analyzing this material at 3 different levels. We're looking at its physical properties, its chemical, or if you will, molecular properties, and then ultimately its atomic properties. And it's really at that point we'll be able to make some sort of definitive conclusion, keeping in mind that we still have to follow the scientific process and methods, and at the same time have peer review. So it's not just as simple as coming out and saying, hey, look what we found. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done.
I bet that's right, and of course should be challenged, as you ought to be challenged, I think. But quickly sum it up for us. Why do you think this material might be connected to UFOs?
Well, without getting into a lot of detail right now, because frankly, it's too speculative for me at this point to say why I think something. At the end of the day, it's going to be what the analysis tells us. And if you have, for example, interesting isotopic ratios that are not normally found, let's say, on this planet, then you have to scratch your head and either A, it's been engineered that way, or B, it came from somewhere else. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to find out.
The Pentagon was required by the last defense authorization bill to produce some of their files on UFOs, and it turns out they have known about this since the end of the Second World War, which ended in 1945. Been a huge increase during that war, during the war as well. Huge increase in UFO sightings, in UFO crashes, et cetera, et cetera. And it turns out the federal government has been tracking this for 80 years and lying about it. So why? Well, that's a great question, and I can't answer it. I have theories, but I don't know. But here's what I learned. Just to the first question is this real? Or am I just being a crazy person who's spending too much time on the internet? For example, UFOs appear to be attracted, for whatever reason, to nuclear energy. So at nuclear missile bases in the upper Midwest, for example, nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, nuclear-powered submarines are all getting buzzed by these objects, including underwater. We've interviewed a number of experts on the show, people familiar with footage in the possession of the U.S. military, who have said there is tape out there of unidentified flying objects descending from the sky and then disappearing into the ocean. Well, today, that video emerged. The Pentagon has just confirmed that the footage is real. You're seeing it now on your screen. It was taken by the Combat Information Center on board the USS Omaha on July 15th, 2019, off the coast of San Diego. As far as we know, the UFO in question was never recovered. There was no material indicating a crash. More than that, we don't know. Tom Rogan is a Washington Examiner columnist, well-versed in the subject. He joins us tonight. Tom, what do you think we're looking at here?
Well, I think we may well be looking at a true unknown, which is to say intelligently controlled machinery that is not understood to be in the possession of the United States, China, or Russia, which are the three most advanced countries in terms of military aviation. And so, you know, the video in and of itself is limiting what it can tell us, but I think it speaks to, as the Pentagon itself has admitted, this continuing trend of truly unexplained things coming into the public consciousness more than they have before.
And in a number of cases, these things have landed on military bases, including famously in Germany, in West Germany in the 70s. And servicemen have approached them. Like, what is this thing? There's this like giant glowing thing on the base. And they approach and they get traumatic brain injury. Like they are rendered. Like, they get brain damage or they're killed. And he studied their brains. And they have, this is all totally real. This is the Department of Defense, dude. And they've all had this damage from some kind of powerful energy that we cannot identify. So then this guy's like, wow, he's just a scientist. He never believed in UFOs. He's like, this is real. I cannot believe this is real. This is like crazy. He should do research on it. He's still at Stanford. And it turns out that actually, yes, these things have been shot down and crashed, and the US government has the wreckage, and it's being held by defense contractors, Raytheon, Lockheed, which are big independent companies, but that work for the US government. They're really part of the Department of Defense, but they're separate. So you can't, their sunshine laws don't apply to them. You can't actually get information from them. It's a very tricky way to hide information. And they have the wreckage from these crafts. And I'm like, really? Are we positive these aren't like advanced Russian or Chinese? No. But I'll tell you this, the most interesting from my perspective, I don't know if it's a consensus, but a lot of people, serious people, not crazy people, who study this stuff, US government employees, seem to believe that these objects are coming from under the oceans. So the conventional view is they're coming in from outer space. There's not actually a lot of, something enters the atmosphere, we can see it on satellite, and there's not any evidence of that actually. Maybe it's happening, but we don't know that it is. There's a lot of evidence these things are coming out of the ocean, including videotape of these objects coming out of the water at high speed, or even more amazing, descending at Mach 3 into the water. And then, of course, we have a huge submarine fleet. What the fuck? Then we have a huge submarine fleet, American, but also Chinese and Russian, underwater with pretty sensitive measurement devices, sonar, etc. And they have recorded these objects doing hundreds of knots underwater. If I take a 45 ACP, a 45 caliber handgun and fire it at you underwater in, say, a swimming pool, 50 feet away, you can catch the bullet because the resistance is so strong from the water that objects can't move that fast underwater. We know that. But they are, and they're moving without any visible means of propulsion, so no wake, no bubbles. Here's what I really think. I think I don't know. And I think that wise people understand the limits of their knowledge and of their perception, and we should all just repeat after me, admit we have no fucking idea.
Yeah, we have no idea.
We have no fucking idea. We don't know who killed Jeffrey Epstein. We don't know what these objects are. We don't know if physics is actually real. Probably not. Like, we don't know anything. We don't know what happens when we die. Like, stop pretending. We don't know where the war in Ukraine is going. Stop pretending that we're God. We're not. And we don't know a lot. And I just wish our leaders would say that. I think they're coming from under the ocean. It seems the evidence suggests that, but what do I know?
What would your encounter look like if you met an alien?
I'd be super respectful, and based on my conversation with this Stanford medical professor, I would conduct that interview at a distance, because whatever is coming off these machines is very bad for the human body.